Thank you so much for thank you so much for joining us. My name is Mary Calleros. I'm one of the co-chairs for the Passaic County chapter with NJTESOL-NJBE. We also have Jessette Rodriguez and Melanie De Dios as co-chairs as well. And we're so excited today to introduce our speaker, Cynthia Velasco, who has a plethora of information for us. And we're so excited to see what she has to share. Just for your to let you know that this meeting is being recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube. So if you do not want to show your face on our YouTube channel, you can just just turn off the video, okay? All right, Miss Velasco, you can take it away.
Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Cynthia Velasco. I've been a teacher, bilingual teacher, I would say about 7 or 8 years. I've been teaching as a teacher, special education, for a total of 12 years. I've been a point person at my building in Paterson, New Jersey for the last 7 years. So I'm very familiar with access, the identification process of multilingual learners, placing them after they've been screened, and the expectation is to eventually wean them out of a full-time bilingual program into a sheltered program to eventually exiting. So I'm here to discuss how we can get our students to be fully bilingual, which is exiting the access assessment, right? That's the end goal. And one of the things that I've noticed from my time being a bilingual point person and constantly doing access is that one, the test doesn't really change, the domains, the clusters stay. 1, 2, then you have the 3, 4. um, so the clusters in the sense of the questioning doesn't change. The expectation is they want our students to really become familiar with the vocabulary. They want the test heavily focuses on higher order vocabulary, and the only way we really can get our kids to pass the assessment and really become fluent and bilingual is by exposing them to the academic vocabulary, that tier 3 vocabulary. So I'll be discussing that. I'm going to talk about the difference of um, students doing, which is playground or lunchroom conversations where they are exposing themselves to the English language, to the actual the expectation, which is the academic, and what can we do as educators to get them there. I know many of us, we have the cognates and the vocabulary, the word walls, and things of that sort, but really focusing on giving you an example of a fraction lesson. How would that look like to, to expose a third grade student to a fraction lesson with a heavy duty vocabulary, and what are some of the hands-on materials that they can utilize to get them to absorb that and utilize that. Just math was I felt like as a universal language, so I felt like that was a good one. But there are other examples that I can go into. So I have my presentation up.
Cynthia, you keep cutting in and out. I don't know if
Just
it's the Wi-Fi.
like, oh no. Okay. Oh, this this one, I'm a little concerned. I'm about to hop on my hotspot actually because I'm a little concerned that it's gonna cut me off.
That's
Mm,
okay.
okay. Let's see if I get lucky to go on this hotspot here better. There now. I'm on the hotspot. So beyond fluency, true bilingualism, coffee shop versus classroom. To be in a second language is the same as teaching algebra in it. So it focuses on the complexity of the information, of the vocabulary, and like I mentioned in the very beginning, there's a big difference. I think, especially with our parents, and I know have a situation this year that I have a parent, but my child really, they talk in English. They're able to help me translate when I go to the doctor. And I said, that's amazing. I love the fact that they're exposed to a second language and they're able to translate and trans language, their ideas and expectations in a classroom. But the expectation for your child at this grade level is that they can write a 5 paragraph essay, or that they can expand their thoughts based on an essay that they read. Giving the parents the expectation of what we want to see their child do sometimes can be frustrating for a parent, because in their mind, the child understands and can, articulate their ideas in the second language they're out to. So this goes into focusing what can we do to help their child get to mastery of vocabulary, which again would help them exit or pass the access assessment. The two tiers of proficiency. Um, this is looking at the iceberg model, and we see here their home language, and we see here that in order for us, it says social language, playground. These are some of the things that when a child comes into the country brand new, by 2 years in, we see them speak. And this is where the parents come in and they say, I want my child in English only. And why are they still in a bilingual class? Or why haven't they exited ESL? Why are they still being pulled out? I don't want them to be pulled out. I want them to be in the class. And this is where we see that the brain, right, takes 5 to 7 years to actually understand and acquire that expert level vocabulary. And this is not, something that I'm coming up with. This is known facts. This is something that's looked at and studied thoroughly. That's why when you look at the access score, we have in Patterson a thing called the fingerprint. So a child is tested access, and then they give us a layout, a map, and they say, you know what, the projected time that the child should exit based on what they already know is this many years. And what can we do now? What are some of the describers that we can focus on now to help them reach that projected end date? And I will go into that because I have an example of a child. I whited out their information. And that way, this is a child in first grade. So, what can we do in the classroom to help support that child? And that's where your small group setting comes in. That's where your recommendations for the parents to do at home, some of the things that they can do. Um, so, as many of the educators stop at the BICS, which is the basic communication, and you see it a lot in the classrooms there, that sometimes, especially for teachers that haven't been taught the psyop model, or the actual, like, the sheltered instruction, the way they're supposed to do it, they'll just say, well, we're translating everything, so that's fine. But it goes deeper. You're not saying, the vocabulary that you're using is not an intense vocabulary, and I'm aware that maybe that child might be, their CPL or their comprehensive level may be a little lower, but scaffolding, providing those experiences for them to acquire that language, is necessary. And I always say sink or swim. Some kids did sink or swim for a really long time, and they were, just fine in a sense, but providing kids with opportunities that eventually they are going to recognize and own the language, own those higher tier 3 vocabulary words. We need to do that. So this is going to focus a little bit on that. How we absorb language. So this focuses on our level of competence, and then it focuses on our level of understanding, right? And so even like with guided reading, we look at, we need to scaffold. For example, if a child is reading at a level C at the end of kindergarten, well, you know what? During our small group assignment, we're going to read at a level D. That way, we're pushing them a little further because we're reading it together. We're reading it with the teacher. We're focusing on those higher level vocabulary words. We're exposing them to content they might not be exposed to at home, or they might not be aware. So the hypothesis is if we expose them to things that they are not comfortable or they're not aware of, eventually more and more exposure will lead them to own that material, those words, the vocabulary, and then it becomes theirs. Um, The affective filter is a mental block caused by negative factors. When the filter is high, input cannot reach the part of the brain reasonable for language acquisition. So, for example, when a child, and that's why it's so important when they first come in and they're coming into those ESL classes to provide the social emotional piece first, and then focus on the academics. And unfortunately, I know it's hard as a teacher, and I know myself, the data, the dibbles, the phonics, the this, the that, the NJSLA, and it's like everything else. But if the child has social phobia or social anxiety, they're not going to learn. They could be the brightest child in their L1, but they're not going to learn until they feel comfortable. So providing, yes, opportunities for them to take risk, but at the same time being aware that it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to not be aware of something. I always say, we look at those no, not access, the NJSLA accommodations, and we say, oh, word to word dictionary. I'm like, how many people actually use the word to word dictionary? How many people actually know how to use? We're so tied into technology and Google Translate and all of that. And I'm like, but that's not always, it's not always true. And I noticed it even on when you use Google Translate for another country, like, for another language that I'm not familiar with. I go to another person, especially like Arabic. I go to another person that speaks that dialect, and I'm like, is this what I'm trying to say? And they're like, no. So using those word to word dictionaries and making them familiar. I used to always, when I used to teach ESL at Oasis. I used to have a word to word dictionary with pictures, and it would be things that we've already been exposed to. So they would have their own. So if I was working with a smaller group, while the kids were doing other things, we would read about something, we would talk about it, we would look at videos about it, we would then put it in a word to word dictionary that we had our own, and that would be theirs. And then they had it in class and they could always come back to it and they can utilize that to make connections to other things. And this is just a basic example, but it really ties into building vocabulary. Um, I know the last thing is motivation. I think lack of interest. If we get kids, the younger we get them, and the more things that we do, like games and different activities. I always say even food because everybody loves food. That's why my fraction activity has to do with pizza. Um, they hone into it. They attach themselves. They make that connection, and then moving forward, it just becomes easier. Um, so a strategy is create a low anxiety environment where mistakes are viewed as data and not failures. And I always tell kids, I'm like, it's just an opportunity for us to just do it differently next time. Because I always tell them it's not wrong, it's just a different way of doing it. And that way it allows for them to take those risks again. I think kids, especially when it comes to articulation, they really have a hard time. They're, embarrassed. So I know I see a lot in the access assessment. The speaking portion is, the plummeted portion, the lowest portion. So I tried to have them test with somebody that they're familiar with, test them with people that are not their peers, put them in isolated areas. There's a million ways that I've tried to test kids. But then I also tell them, you're not going to talk like your friend because your friend has been living in America for this many years. And sometimes it just takes a little longer, and that's okay. So with vocabulary is kind of the same thing because sometimes your brain is thinking about a word in Spanish and you're like, I know it in English, but I just can't say it. Um, and with that tier three, it's, especially if they haven't been exposed to it multiple ways, they're not going to, they're not going to, that word's not going to populate in their mind. Input is not enough. You must produce language to notice the gaps in your own knowledge. It forces syntactic processing. So, so it pretty much it says force yourself to speak and write about complex topics even when you're uncomfortable, and that's why I always say exposure is so important, because unfortunately and especially in the community that I work in, it's very hard. What do you do? Oh, I went to the park, or I was home watching TV. The sentences, the level is very, very. You have simple sentences, one worded, two worded answers. Very choppy. So modeling for them, the expectation, having the print. Um, in the classroom, providing. I always we were talking about it today with my admin. I was like providing a buddy that is really like I have these amazing readers, and then I have these readers that are timid, and they're just worried about stumbling their words, and they're unfamiliar with the pronunciation, and pairing them together so that they can listen to their buddies, because kids learn better from other kids. And it's not an embarrassing thing, it's just something that it's statistically proven that kids work learn better from other kids. I can be doing a lecture and they will not learn from me as much as they will learn from a buddy. So having those buddies that are really good readers or really good at expressing themselves, be a model. Doing your small groups where you're saying, okay, now you're gonna have a pal reading time. Now you're gonna go read with your pal. I'm gonna work on the small group. Then we're gonna rotate, and then you check for understanding how they were they playing around or were they actually working. That's one way of building that vocabulary as well. Language is culture. You cannot separate language from its culture. True bilingualism requires biculturalism. And then looks at the surface. The surface is, flags, festivals. I always say we have here multicultural day, and everybody brings their own dish, and that's wonderful. Oh, we are embracing each other's culture, we're respecting it, and we want to learn from it. But into it, it looks at concepts of time, body language. Oh no, something happened. Okay. Oh, let's see if it'll click in. I'm on my hotspot. That's weird. I'm on my hotspot. Sorry.
No worries. Is there any way we can support you?
Um, no, I think it's popping up. I don't know why. It's like the black hole, but the wife, my hotspot's there. There you go. Oh, okay. Am I presenting the? It's loading. This, I guess with the technology issues that I'm having. Oh, there it is. um, am I presenting the screen or wait? Nope, I'm not presenting the screen. I need to share my screen again. Sorry.
Yeah, share,
Does anybody have
reshare.
any questions while I'm?
I just wanted to talk about the affective filter. Like, as a veteran teacher, I forget about that, you know? So thank you for reminding me.
I think
That's so good.
yeah, I
We
think it's hard for us to all, go back to our younger selves and try to remember. I mean, I came to the United States when I was in second grade, so I had no foundation of English whatsoever. So having to like drill myself back to that younger self and what it took for me to learn the language, and then utilize some of those strategies in my own, in the classrooms now. Especially because we're seeing that as kids are coming in, there's a lot of gaps because of COVID. So if COVID affected the United States a certain way, we can only imagine how it affected Latin American countries, the Caribbean, which had limited resources, to deal with the pandemic, let alone education, let alone, technology and all of that. So, I think that it's hard for us to remember that and focus on that tier 3 vocabulary. Like I'm trying to take care of you, but at the same time, um I need to expose you to all this stuff. And how can I do that? How can I expose you to all this, heavy duty vocabulary when you're really have a lot of gaps and your instruction is interrupted. So it's looking at concepts, past and future, even like I was talking to the first grade teacher, like the ed, just writing ed at the end of the word. It's like they're like, huh? And these are kids that have been in the country since kindergarten, so they did kindergarten with us and now they're doing first grade, and it's like she's like they're really having a hard time, let alone the pronunciation. And then when I give them a test or like a little quick checks for understanding, they're struggling, just decoding it, just writing it on a piece of paper, utilizing it on like understanding that this is a past tense. um so uh Going into deeper of the culture, it mentions growing up, it mentions finding your own self, being friends, how does friendships look like. So all of that ties in. And unfortunately, kids are trying to still navigate through the language, let alone other things that come with it, and us having to support all of that while trying to expose them to this heavy duty vocabulary. Because again, the expectation is, and I've been teaching for a long time, and I know that a lot of kids stay in the bilingual program for a really long time. And That's not the objective. The objective is to try to expose them and give them as much support in their L2 that they're getting from us to eventually exit out and have more opportunities, at least in Patterson, have more opportunities to teach, to go to different schools versus just being tied into one high school, or two. So how can we do that? How does that look like? I have other examples of children that come in, they do 2 years, and have somehow, some way, it's like they're writing beautiful essays, better than kids that were born here and went to school here their whole life. So it's just a matter of how they are able to utilize all the strategies that they're given at school, and are the teachers really utilizing that heavy duty vocabulary. So looking at domain specific, looking at the actual technical vocabulary, which is what I mentioned before, that takes up to 7 years. That's why when the kids come in, I always say when the kids come in and they're like in fifth or sixth grade, it's really rough when they're in the middle school, and they come in, because now we're doing NJSLA. And yes, we do it after a whole year. They take the NJSLA ELA, but a whole year to catch up to that tier 3 vocabulary is not enough. So, giving those constant word walls and the pictures, and then examples of how their text should look like, and what can we do, how can we support it. So it looked at the little chart, looked at like science. Like, for example, as a teacher, you would say plants eat light, instead of using that terminology of photosynthesis. For math, the top number when you're looking at fractions, and instead of a numerator. History, people were mad when you're talking about the beginning of a war, civil unrest. So just focusing on those specific tier 3 words and providing examples, because civil unrest, how does that look like? People were mad. How were they mad? Let's look at the Boston Tea Party. That's a good example. Let's look at the beginning of World War I, like things of that sort. When you provide them with examples, and I always say, like, brain pop somehow, some way is like my end all be all. Especially now that brain pop is available in Spanish. This is the end all be all. I always say, if you don't know what to focus on, do some brain pop, and then go back to YouTube and look at those. There's documentaries, there's little snippets of things, and that's hard. I know, because there's not a lot of time. I know teachers are like, there's no time. And I'm like, but you need to make some time, because those connections aren't going to be there. Like, if you tell a child from, I don't know, Belize, civil unrest, they might not know how that looks like. They might have no idea. Um, you know, uh, when you're looking at photosynthesis, providing them with, there's usually, like, there's videos, there's text. I know we're lucky in my building that we have the science books in Spanish and in English. So we always, like I tell the teachers, use them side by side. Have the kids look at those keywords in English as well as in Spanish. Have them create their own word to word dictionary. Have them draw a picture of it because now they're owning it. Now they're making that connection. I always say the more visuals and hands on activities that they can do um, to connect to those vocabulary words is the likelihood that they are to utilize them outside of the classroom. And on an everyday thing, just having a conversation with a friend, looking at oh, I noticed in the news. And I know people are like, the news, the kids don't care. Like, you think that the kids don't care. There's always going to be your good number of kids that talk about stuff like that, or they hear their parents talk about it. And then now they can chime in on a conversation. Um, so, and also, let's be honest, NJSLA asks you a lot of questions that kids are not like familiar with. I remember one of the access questions, it had them look at a chart and how are pictures how has photography changed? This was like one of the middle school questions. How has photography changed from the 1980s till now? And it looked at, they had to compare and contrast, right? So now they had to look at specific things in the text. So they had to learn that strategy while they were in class. They had to learn how they were going to write a comparison of how were things before. They had to make those bullet points. How are things now? Make those bullet points. And then they had to utilize specific words that were mentioned about photography in the past to photography nowadays. So if you don't break an essay down to that level, it's very hard for a child to show that they have any understanding and they're able to apply those ideas in text, which is, again, the objective of exiting. We want the kids to show growth. Um, it says activities or strategies to level up, shadowing, listening to a native speaker, and repeat exactly what they say while they're saying it, mimic intonation, speed, rhythm. So, like I was saying, the peer buddies, right? When you have your peer pals reading with you, it's not people are like, but do they understand? I'm like, at first they might not, maybe we might just be hitting up on the fluency, but little by little the objective is that they are going to comprehend. We don't want to have a parrot, we want to have somebody that understands what they're going to read. um, Read novels or academic papers without stopping to look up every word. Focus on global comprehension and flow. And that's why I say it's so important for you. And I do tell a lot of our teachers that have sheltered instruction students. I'm like exposing them to snippets. I know one of the teachers in the benchmark fourth grade, it was The Wizard of Oz. And I'm like, it's a 1950s movies. These kids, especially like the new kids that came from like DR, Colombia, they don't know what the Wizard of Oz is. I'm like, I would suggest showing them videos, snippets of, how life was like back there, how, the main characters, they have now a visualization of who is Dorothy, you know who is this character, and then reading it with them and stopping and asking, what happened to this character, what happened to this character, you know those quick checks for understanding, like comprehension pieces, and focusing on the heavy duty book. Like, I remember there was a word, parched. I'm like, they're not going to know what that is. So you need to show them, whether it's modeling, like actually acting it out or something, those connections that they're going to make by just acting it out, by, like I said, creating that word to word dictionary, by watching the video of somebody how parched, they can be parched, things of that sort. And then, once you do the reading, you can have them watch parts of the Wizard of Oz and do a comparison, compare and contrast, because we know NJSLA asks that too. They show us a video of something, they show us a text, and they say compare and contrast. So it's not working towards the test. It's knowing that this is what the test will ask them to do, and if they really want to show how they are learning and if they're using those tier three vocabulary words, this is what they must do. Um, Bilingual kids are their brain is constantly thinking in Spanish or in their L1 as they're being exposed to their L2. So we want to support and provide all of those strategies that we have in the class so that they can use it. I always say, use the tools in your toolbox. As rusty or as, as old that they may look like, have them available and have it for the kids and let them know you need to go back there. Sh- you know, are you sure this is, did you analyze this? Can you add on? How does that look like? Lesson translation. Take your existing lesson plans and translate the instructions and lectures. Identify where you get stuck. Um, I'm not big on translation, but I am big on and I put a lot of emphasis on providing examples of things. I always tell them a cognate is like the best thing in the world because it's a word in their L1 that is very very similar to in their in the L2. So now it's like if you know your L1 word, then the likelihood is you're gonna be able to use that word in the L2. Um, that's the way I see it. Oh wait, no, oh, I went too far. Nope, nope, nope. There, nope, one more. There. Bloom taxonomy. Um, Obviously, we're all teachers and we all utilize Bloom's to write our lesson plans. Uh, but being honest, we need to look at leveling up the way we use our own language and we express our ideas to our kids when we're teaching. So it says analyzing the geographical distribution, looking at those specific, because that's exactly what the test asks them. So I was talking to a teacher that teaches our dual language sixth grade kids, and she was telling me she was wrapping her head around, you know, they took the link at NJSLA assessment, and they're, not just the dual language, but some of the sheltered really struggled, and I don't know why. And then she said she went back to the assessment herself, and she noticed that they during PLCs and during teacher meetings they were told utilize this vocabulary, and then when they went ahead and looked at the test utilized a different word. So it was asking them the same exact question, how to look for something in the text, but the wording was different. That wording threw off half of her kids. um, it's just those specific words that are being asked on assessments that throw off our kids, and some kids can wean through them and just bypass it and no big deal. But especially for our multilingual learners, it needs to be specific. We need to focus on what it's asking us to do. How is it asking them? What specific language is being utilized to ask them those questions? And what is it asking them to do, like their output? What does that output look like? Providing those multiple examples. How does a compare and contrast essay look like? What must be done? Because a lot of the kids, I know I was doing the model assessment, and it was like pick spirit days. Pick, if you can have a spirit day, what would you recommend your principal for a spirit day and why? And and it gave them examples of what spirit days they can have and said, but make one of your own. Half of the kids went ahead and copied whatever one of those spirit days was. And I was like, that's not what it was asking you. It said, select something on your own that you would recommend as a spirit day. I think out of the 20 kids that I had to model, 10 of them, half of them got it right. And the other half, it just copy and paste. Like it was just like, nope, we're going to focus on this. And it was like, explain why. It was like, oh, because I like to dress in pink. So I want everybody to dress in pink like me. I was like, that's a good example, but should have dug deeper. Like I'm like, we should, and that's where I'm just rushing through and trying to bypass this assessment. And it was a very simple question. It wasn't, it didn't go into details of like read, text one and text two and compare and contrast, the life cycle of a plant, or what are some of the things that plants need to survive. It it wasn't a very hard question. Translanguaging, which is something that I am very, very big on, I guess, because I teach dual language, is a strategy. There's a strategic use of students' full linguistic repertoire to aid understanding. It is not random code switching or mixing. It is a planned tool. It says students discuss a concept in their L1 to deepen understanding, then write the conclusion in a targeted language. And in our dual language class, what we do is we teach, we have the 90-10, the 80-20. We have the different models based on the grade. But we always tell them, tell us the response in the language you feel more comfortable in. That's how we first begin. And many of the kids, obviously, their L1 is Spanish, but not all, but many of them are. And they write these wonderful essays. And then we sit there and we say, well, what can you add on? But can you add it in English? And that's where we see the comprehension. Do they know what to talk about? Because a lot of them are like, I know what I want to talk about. So what I do is I tell the teachers, use the Google Doc, the speech to text. Many of our kids have headphones just like I do, and have them, if they can't write it out, especially the younger ones, if they can't write it out, have them speak to the Google Doc, and eventually we're going to work on their writing. But are they able to analyze and add on to a text, to a topic in their L2? And the hope is that they do, and that eventually the L2 becomes just as, I guess, not compensated, but just as selected as their L1, because that's true bilingualism. So, oh, and the last but not least is the bilingual advantage. The limits of my language mean the limits of my world. Expand your world so you can expand your students. So it's just one way of us to focus on exposing them to the different, their alto. And I have shared this tab. Okay, I have a little handout looking at expert words. So I'm going to stop for a second while I'm getting ready to show this handout. Yes, anybody have any questions? I don't know if anybody has any. I see on the chat something that I don't know.
Cynthia, I just wanted to jump in and talk about like the cognates. It is surprising to me the amount of
Mm,
teachers that don't know what those are. So thank you for mentioning that. And definitely it helps bridge, right, the language from Spanish to English or whatever the L1 is, right? It helps bridge the L1 to English if we use cognates because of the questioning techniques that you mentioned. For example, like analyze in Spanish is analizar. That's a cognate. And if our students are being taught, how to use our cognates appropriately, that question wouldn't trick them because they have that tool in their toolbox, right? So that's so good. Thank you so much for sharing that.
yeah, I I think many times we forget all of these tools that we have in this bilingual toolbox. And Spanish speakers, we have a ton of tools. I always say, when I want to write in Spanish, I feel like it's never ending because the thought process that goes into and the multiple steps that go into. When I say it in English, it's just like one word. Like literally, like my sentence is like 5 words, and that's it. When I'm talking in Spanish and I have to translate, like what the teacher one is saying to the parent, I'm like, it's full blown. This, we're going. I mean, give me the chair, and it's and it's hard because the brain of the child, if their L1 is Spanish, they're like they want to. they have all these thoughts, all these things to say, but when they write it down in English, it's like literally three sentences. They're like, "That was it. That's," and it's like, "Yeah, that was it." So that's why it's so important for us to focus on all the tools in the toolbox, like the cognates. Cognates are so important. Providing that figurative language. I always said, I was talking to a teacher last year, and I said, "Why haven't you showed my babies the idioms, the figurative language? You haven't shown." And then these are kids going into sixth grade because I said something, and they looked, and I was very close to them, and I said something. We were just all kind of hanging out with the kids, and they looked at me. They were like, puzzled by my statement, and I was like, "Have you guys not taught them idioms?" And they're like, "No." I was like, I was like, "Why?" And they're like, it hasn't come up, and it's probably an idiom probably came up in like second or third grade curriculum. I'm assuming, and the first grade, beginning of second grade. So it's not something that they would have hit on because they were in a full Spanish class. It's not something that it's in English. In English, we focus on these things, not in Spanish. So it's like, oh no. But those are things that are how do you expand your writing? You write certain things that are in the Spanish language you would have never thought of. In English, you have it. So that's why I say the exposure to the vocabulary, the exposure to the culture. When they focus, the SciShow focused on that. I'm like the exposure to the culture, English culture. I mean, there's so many things. Like there's so many phrases that we say that just because we were already raised in the English culture, we say it, we blurb them out. Kids, unless you've been exposed to it, you're not going to be. It's not gonna. You're not gonna own it. You're not gonna say it. So, looking at the handout, it says, master the expert words. Goal to understand and use domain specific vocabulary. Tier three. Um, the three tiers of words. Not all words are the same. We use different layers of language depending on who we are talking to. Tier one, everyday words: run, table, happy, sad, looking at your emotions, looking at objects in your household. Tier two words, school words: analyze, compare, contrast. Expands, some of those words that we utilize to add on to a text. Our tier three are specific words: denominator, numerator, rectangle, photosynthesis, those that specify to the actual subject that they're teaching. An example of a subject, for example, math, the sum, the answer to an addition problem. Science, evaporation, uh, when water turns into a gas and goes into air. So evaporación, right? Se evapora. Same thing. It's a cognate. And that's what I'm saying. Those things, some suma, like I don't know. I feel like there's so many ways that we can intertwine, especially with Spanish to English, English to Spanish, but we just don't think of that. We just don't put that together. We're just so busy trying. You don't know how to add. We need to work on adding, but we also need to work on the vocabulary words that taught teach us that skill. So then that way, when they see it on the assessment, when they see it on the access, they're like, "Oh, that's what is that's what I'm doing. Oh, that's what it's asking the child to do in the story." Um, Social studies, democracy, a type of government where people vote. ELA, stanza, a paragraph in a poem. So those, like, stanza is something that is difficult unless you've worked with poetry, which second grade works with poetry, third grade works with poetry. But if you came to this country in fifth grade or fourth grade, you're not focusing on poems. That you already should have done that. So weaning back to those things that the kids weren't exposed to, I think is also important. The Friar model. When you see a difficult expert word, use this square to help you remember it. So you do like the four squares, the definition, right? What it means in your own words, the characteristics. What do you know about it? What do you know about this word? An example, a real life example. Draw a picture. I always say draw a picture, even with the word to word dictionary, because I'm a visual learner. So I need to like watch a video about it, draw a picture about it, um, act it out. I feel like acting it out, especially for our, our CPL 1.5 to 1.9 or even 2.2. It's, like they make those connections. Now they own it because they've acted it out, and they do it multiple ways, multiple times, different topics, different subjects. Non-example, what is the opposite? What is it not? How does it not look like? Be the expert. Choose one word from your current science or math lesson and fill in the expert card. So going down, I focused on math. Um, Fractions. Expert word fraction, a part of a whole thing. Fracción, fraction, fracción. Cognates, numerator. I was gonna say it in Spanish. Numerator, the top number. It tells how many parts we have. The top number. Numerador. Denominator, the bottom number. It tells how many parts make the whole. Denominador. Equivalent, fractions that are the same size or value. Equivalente. Partition, to divide a shape into equal parts. Partición or dividir, right? I always say many of the words that we have in English, we can utilize in Spanish and vice versa. So if we start utilizing those cognates, have like the cognate word wall, um, when you're focusing on fractions or you're focusing on adding, or, have a wall that focuses on that, have multiple examples of how that looks like, not just something you put up one day and then, okay, yeah, it goes away. No, something that you're utilizing and you're going back to. And I always say, even like the daily reviews, I used to have those when I was teaching homeroom myself. I would be like, all right, while you're eating breakfast, we're going to go over what we went through yesterday, or a topic that we're spiraling back to a topic we went through last week in math. And I'm having them watch a video, and I say, we're going to have a to do just really quick after you're done eating, just to see, checks for understanding. Those little activities reminds the brain to, this is what we did, this is the words that were used. And like I said, the more you're exposed to it, the more you own it. 3 activities to lock in vocabulary. Cognate hunt. Give students the English list and ask them to guess the Spanish word. Then they will be excited to see how much expert English they already know. Total physical response. For denominator, have students point to the floor, right? The denominator is the bottom number, numerator is the top number. And you can do the same thing with the numerator. Point to the ceiling. Vocabulary Pictionary. Have students draw the word without using letters. If their partner can guess a tier 3 word, they get a point. So this is where you're able to see if they have absorbed what you've taught. If they're able to apply their knowledge and then put it on paper. It's like almost like charades, but just with paper. How to use these in your classroom. So there's like I mentioned, putting, cutting things and putting them like flashcards. But this is an example of the numerator, the fraction bar, the denominator. Having a picture, if you're focusing on fractions, having a picture of this. I would even have a picture of a pizza, which is something that we're going to go over, and having the 8 slices, and then you have the denominator be the 8. Because that's a total number of slices in a pie. And then I'm going to, have little examples. Joey ate 3. Emmanuel se comió 2 piezas. ¿Cuántas partes de la pizza él se las comió? ¿Dos de qué? 2 de 8, right? 2 octavos. Fractions are one of the most visual concepts in 3rd grade math. Since we're discussing English learners, it gives us a practice sheet, the Great Pizza Partition. And you have your expert words, right? Fraction, fracción, numerator, numerador, denominator, denominador, equivalent, equivalente, partition, we said divide. I'm going to go back here. I don't want to say it wrong. Partición or dividir. And then it gives us Um, because I know with math, we're doing math modeling. That's heavily focused for NJSLA in grade three, especially because kids come from second grade and they have not been exposed to modeling. We are finding the more and more that we get these kids in third grade that it's like what there was a lot of direct instruction, there was a lot of putting things down on paper, but then there wasn't a lot of modeling of that math. Show me two ways of how you can have an equivalent of this. They're like, wait, what do you mean? Well, you can use an array, you can use a drawing, you can use the actual fractions, like the actual, so there's like multiple, you can use a number line, and they're like, wait, what do you mean? Multiple ways? Like, I just know how to do it this one way. So with math, obviously, we're not only looking at vocabulary, we're looking at the expectations of what they should have learned, especially with modeling. Today is a busy day at the pizza shop. You can, have kids never been to a pizza shop, which I highly doubt, but you never know, right? They're becoming more and more dinosaurs. Like I have a picture of you could even you can say we're going to make a pizza store, a pizza shop, and everybody's going to buy something. And a customer wants to blank a large pizza into 8 equal slices. So what word would we use? He wants to partition, he wants to divide, he wants to put equal amounts, right? This means the blank or the number in the bottom will be 8. So now you're looking at you're leaving blanks, you're already defining the word, right? Because you already exposed them. You had your vocabulary, you had your visual, and now you're having them fill in the blank. They can do it with a partner, that can be your we do, then or you can make that as your you do. um, and then eventually you can have a fraction practice where you have your actual pizza. And then you can say how many total equal parts are there, and then how many parts are shaded. You can have, uh, Cynthia wants to eat 4 slices. Four out of how many? 4 out of 6. 4 to 6 slices were eaten by Cynthia. Uh, those kinds of wording, that kind of questioning, the visuals being there is going to be making it easier for the kids, for the students to understand the concept of fractions, and eventually doing equivalent fractions, because I know that we dig deeper and we focus on now, okay, 4 6, um what's equivalent to 4 6, and then we have 12s, and 12 what, and how would that look like? And so you getting the ball rolling on that, providing those opportunities for them to try the concepts, use the vocabulary, do the modeling of it, try it with a partner, do it with the whole class. The more exposure they get to those terms, to the modeling, to actually practicing themselves, the more they will own that and they will able to use that. And I know with access, it does focus on, when it goes into the math, it looks at pi, at bar graphs, it looks at data sheets. So those vocabularies, terminology needs to be there. The last bit, if I have a little bit of time left, I'm good. I have a little bit of time.
Yes, we have 3 minutes left.
Okay. Um, Sorry, I talk a lot. Good thing, bad thing, I don't know. Oh, wait, get it out. Okay,
It's
there
great. It's very
we go.
informational. Are you able to share that document so that we can put it in the chat?
Yes,
Okay, great. Thank you.
I am. I'm sharing a child's, which I blanked out their information. Nope, don't go too far. There you go. There you. I'm sharing a child who's I blanked out her. She's a girl. Her actual access. We call it the fingerprint here at School 16, and There you go. And access actually gives us the opportunity to, let me see if I can zoom in a little more. 50%? Nope. 100%. Well, technology is not my friend. This child was tested in the kindergarten class. Composite was 1.8. The expectation is that this coming year she will be a 2.5, and that she will eventually exit the bilingual program or access in grade 4. And it looks at all the candle describers that we can focus on with her. Um, so it mentions, for example, her listening is at developing. So how can we continue to to push her on, get her from developing to expanding? What can we do? Acting out songs and chants, identifying language associated with features or objects or print. Show me a word in the title. um, when you're looking at responding non-verbally, to show agreement, disagree, thumbs up, thumbs down. When it looks at her reading, which one of her scores, her lower score was reading, matching icons and symbols. And I always say matching picture to the word. Those are one of our best. Labeling pictures. We love to say, what did you do this weekend? And then they draw a picture of mom and, going to the park, and then say label mom, label park, label swing. Um, because jump, what were you doing? Or you were jumping, or what else were you doing? Expanding the vocabulary. But this is a good way, guidance, to help teachers understand what can they do in the classroom at this moment in time to help build on that. So I can also share, it's blanked out, I can also share an example of the candle describers on that. But let me share with you this handout. And then if anybody has any other questions or concerns, I know I talked a lot.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I see the link in the chat. I also put the PD certificate link in the chat. So if you attended today's PD, feel free to fill out the form so that you can get a PD certificate for the hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We could stay on if anybody has any questions for a couple of minutes. Is that okay, Cynthia?
Yeah, that's fine.